It was October 12, 1968, and Dean Martin was sitting in his Beverly Hills home office reviewing contracts with his attorney when he stumbled upon information that would shatter his understanding of his most important friendship. At 51, Dean had built his career on loyalty, trust, and genuine relationships, particularly his legendary partnership with Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack. For nearly 15 years, Dean and Frank had been inseparable, both professionally and personally. They had conquered Las Vegas together, made movies together, and created some of the most memorable entertainment in American history. More importantly, Dean had considered Frank to be his closest friend, someone he trusted completely and would have done anything for. But the documents Dean was reviewing that October afternoon revealed a truth so devastating that it called into question everything he thought he knew about their friendship. The discovery began innocently enough. Dean's lawyer, Martin Goldstein, had brought over contracts for Dean's upcoming engagement at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas. As they went through the paperwork, Goldstein mentioned something that caught Dean's attention. "Dean, I'm curious about something," Goldstein said. "The Sands is offering you significantly less money for this engagement than they offered last year, even though your shows have been selling out consistently. Do you know why?" Dean was surprised by the question. He had always trusted Frank to negotiate fair deals for both of them, since Frank had more connections in Las Vegas and seemed to understand the casino business better. "Frank handles most of the Vegas negotiations," Dean replied. "He's always gotten us good deals before." Goldstein looked uncomfortable. "Dean, I think we need to look into this more carefully. I've been hearing some things about the way these contracts are structured, and I'm concerned that you might not be getting what you're worth." Over the next 3 days, Goldstein conducted a thorough investigation of Dean's Las Vegas contracts going back 5 years. What he discovered was a pattern of financial manipulation that had cost Dean millions of dollars and revealed a betrayal by his closest friend that was both systematic and deeply personal. The investigation revealed that Frank Sinatra had been using his friendship with Dean to negotiate contracts that heavily favored Frank's financial interests while minimizing Dean's earnings. Frank had been telling the casinos that Dean was willing to work for less money in exchange for better accommodations and treatment, while simultaneously negotiating higher fees for himself. But the financial betrayal was only the beginning. Goldstein's investigation uncovered evidence that Frank had been using Dean's name and reputation to secure deals for other entertainers that Frank represented, often without Dean's knowledge or consent. Most shocking of all was the discovery that Frank had been secretly recording some of their private conversations and using the information to gain advantages in business negotiations. Frank would learn about Dean's personal problems, financial concerns, or career uncertainties, then use that information to position himself as the more reliable and professional partner when dealing with casino executives. When Goldstein presented all of this evidence to Dean, the reaction wasn't what anyone expected. Dean didn't explode in anger, didn't demand immediate revenge, and didn't threaten to expose Frank publicly. Instead, Dean Martin did something that revealed the depth of his character and would ultimately teach Frank Sinatra the most important lesson of his life. Dean's first reaction was silence. He spent several hours alone in his study, reviewing the evidence and trying to understand how someone he had trusted completely could have betrayed that trust so systematically. When Dean finally spoke to Goldstein about the situation, his response surprised even his lawyer. "Martin," Dean said calmly, "I want you to do something for me. I want you to calculate exactly how much money Frank's actions have cost me over the past 5 years, every penny. And then I want you to figure out how much additional money Frank made from these deals that should have been mine." Goldstein spent the next week working with accountants to determine the exact financial impact of Frank's betrayal.
The numbers were staggering. Dean had lost approximately $2.3 million in potential earnings, while Frank had gained roughly $1.8 million through his manipulations. When Goldstein presented these figures to Dean, he expected his client to demand legal action or at least confrontation. Instead, Dean made a decision that would become legendary in entertainment industry circles. "I want you to arrange a private meeting with Frank," Dean said. "Just the two of us, somewhere quiet where we can talk without interruption." The meeting was arranged for October 25, 1968, at Frank's Palm Springs compound. Dean drove out alone, telling no one except Goldstein about the purpose of the meeting. Frank thought they were simply getting together to discuss upcoming Rat Pack performances. What happened during that 3-hour conversation between Dean Martin and Frank Sinatra has never been fully documented, but several people who knew both men well have provided insights into what transpired. According to Frank's longtime assistant, Dorothy Oleman, who was in the house during the meeting, she could hear Frank's voice becoming increasingly agitated, while Dean's voice remained calm and steady throughout their conversation. Dean began the meeting by presenting Frank with copies of all the contracts, recordings, and financial documents that proved the betrayal. Frank's initial reaction was to deny everything, then to minimize the importance of his actions, and finally to become angry that Dean had investigated him. But Dean's response to Frank's defensiveness was what made this confrontation extraordinary. Instead of attacking Frank or demanding an explanation, Dean did something that caught Frank completely off guard. He expressed concern for what had driven Frank to betray their friendship. "Frank," Dean said, according to later accounts, "I'm not here to fight with you or to embarrass you. I'm here because I want to understand what happened to us. We used to be friends, real friends. When did that change?" Dean's approach forced Frank to confront not just his actions, but his motivations. Over the course of their conversation, Frank revealed insecurities and competitive feelings that he had been harboring for years.
Frank admitted that he had always felt overshadowed by Dean's natural charisma and effortless cool. While Frank worked hard to maintain his image and control every aspect of his career, Dean seemed to achieve the same level of success without any apparent effort. "You make everything look easy," Frank told Dean. "People love you without you having to try. I've always had to fight for everything." Frank also revealed that he had been struggling with financial pressures that Dean wasn't aware of. Despite his success, Frank had made several bad investments and was supporting a large number of family members and associates. The additional money from manipulating Dean's contracts had helped Frank maintain his lifestyle and meet his obligations. But perhaps most importantly, Frank admitted that he had convinced himself that Dean didn't really care about money or business details, so taking advantage of that perceived indifference was somehow justified. Dean listened to all of Frank's explanations without interruption, then delivered a response that would change both men forever. "Frank," Dean said, "I understand everything you just told me, but here's what I need you to understand. I trusted you completely. I would have given you anything you needed if you had just asked me. Instead, you decided to take it without asking, and that changed our friendship into something else." Dean paused, then continued with words that Frank would remember for the rest of his life. "I'm not angry about the money, Frank. I'm heartbroken about the friendship. You turned me into a mark instead of keeping me as a friend." What Dean proposed next shocked Frank and everyone else who eventually learned about it. Dean offered to forgive the debt completely and continue their professional relationship, but with one condition. Frank had to agree to donate an equivalent amount of money to charity, and he had to do it publicly, explaining that he was honoring a commitment to make things right. "I don't want your money, Frank," Dean said. "I want you to remember what it feels like to be generous instead of calculating. Maybe that will help you understand what friendship is supposed to be about." Frank was stunned by Dean's proposal. He had expected anger, demands for repayment, or even legal action. Instead, Dean was offering him a path to redemption that would actually enhance Frank's public image while teaching him a lesson about generosity. But Dean wasn't finished. He also proposed that they restructure their future business relationship to ensure complete transparency. All contracts would be negotiated separately, with each man's interests represented by independent parties.
"We can still work together," Dean said, "but we're going to do it as equals who respect each other, not as friends where one is taking advantage of the other." Frank accepted Dean's terms, but the emotional impact of the confrontation was profound. Frank later told close associates that Dean's response to his betrayal had taught him more about character and friendship than any other experience in his life. "Dean could have destroyed me," Frank reportedly said. "Instead, he saved me from myself." Frank made the charitable donations as promised, contributing $1.8 million to various children's charities over the following year. He used the opportunity to publicly praise Dean Martin's influence on his life, though he never revealed the specific circumstances that had led to his generosity. The restructured business relationship between Dean and Frank actually strengthened their professional success. Without the underlying manipulation and resentment, both men were able to focus on creating great entertainment rather than worrying about who was getting the better deal. But perhaps the most significant impact of Dean's handling of the betrayal was on Frank's personal development. Frank began approaching all of his relationships with more honesty and generosity, understanding that real power comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. The Rat Pack's final years were marked by a genuine friendship between Dean and Frank that was deeper and more authentic than their earlier relationship had been. Frank often credited Dean with teaching him the difference between being respected and being feared. "Dean showed me that the strongest thing you can do when someone betrays you is to help them become someone who wouldn't do that again," Frank told Sammy Davis Jr. years later. The story of Dean's response to Frank's betrayal became legendary in Hollywood, though the specific details were kept private for decades. Entertainment industry executives began using Dean's handling of the situation as an example of how to deal with business conflicts with dignity and wisdom. But the most lasting impact was on Dean himself. His ability to respond to betrayal with grace and wisdom rather than anger and revenge became one of the defining characteristics of his legend. Dean Martin had discovered that his best friend was using him, but instead of destroying that friendship, he transformed it into something better. He proved that real strength isn't about winning fights, it's about turning enemies into allies and betrayal into understanding. Frank Sinatra lived the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the friendship Dean Martin had offered him, even after Frank had betrayed it. And Dean Martin proved once again that the coolest thing you can be isn't untouchable, it's unshakable in your commitment to treating people better than they treat you. What Dean did next didn't just blow Frank's mind, it changed Frank's heart. And that's why their friendship, tested by betrayal and strengthened by forgiveness, became one of the greatest partnerships in entertainment history. The Rat Pack might have been built on fun and friendship, but it was saved by one man's understanding that real friendship means helping someone become their best self, even when they've shown you their worst.